Hello, everybody. This is Talk to Me with Eugene Williams. And today, on this inaugural edition of Talk to Me, we're coming in hot. We came to you with a bright, shining star who's zooming across the sky right now. She's an educator, a writer, a speaker, a consultant. Uh, as far as I'm concerned, she is the preeminent force in social media education content creation. You know what I'm saying? So you got to know that. I'm sure if you have been on social media, she's somewhere. If you're a teacher on social media, she's somewhere in your timeline and on your For You page. So you have to know that. I also want to let you know some things about her because she's not just an internet star. Okay, it's not just that. She's got credentials. Okay, she knows from when she speaks. She has a doctorate in curriculum and studies from Liberty University. Okay, shout out to her for that. Her dissertation title was First Year Teacher Stress and the Impact on Student-Teacher Relationships. And I believe, it's my understanding, that she is even trying her hand at comedy these days. So as I told her before we started, when she gets that, Netflix special that is coming, she needs to holler at her boy. Now, here's how I know her, okay? I told you all that I've lived a very Forrest Gumpian life. And in the course of my life, I have either had influence on great people or great people have had influence on me. It was a blessing I believe it was 2011, 2012, somewhere around that time.
2013.
2013. I was the assistant principal at that time in a past life. And I had a chance to run across a very talented young educator who changed the lives of a lot of her students, and she's still changing lives today. So, in the words of Don Cornelius from Soul Train, from where we're standing, we're going to put our hands together and give it all up for Dr. Andrea Forcum.
Thank you so much. What an introduction. Amazing. Yes. I'm so glad to be here.
You deserve it. I'm honored that you would take time to be on my inaugural podcast because I always like to start off with folks that I know are doing great things. And so folks are also relatable. And one of the goals of this podcast is to let people know the folks that you see doing great things are not really that much different than you. They took initiative, they had opportunities, and you yourself can do those same things. And so you are a perfect example of that. So I wanted to start off by letting you know how proud I am of you. Having been your supervisor some years ago and seeing where you have blossomed into a great educator, the teacher, the student has surpassed the teacher, no doubt about that. And
thank you. I don't know that we could jump that far in because the only reason that I was able to actually start teaching was because you and the team there were willing to take a pretty big risk, because when I got hired, it was on a provisional license. Like, I was not, guys, when Mr. Williams hired me, I didn't have my license. I was so ambitious, but I was like, nah, you guys should just hire me. And myself and then one other teacher got hired on provisional licenses that year. And we just created so much paperwork for you.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot. Mm-hmm. But it was like they say about John Lewis, it was good trouble.
For the most part, yeah. Lessons were learned.
And I was glad to be, involved in your development at that time. But I want to start with some things. Number one, you've been an educator now for, just close to 20 years, right?
No, I'm not quite. So it's 2025. So it would be 12 years.
12 years.
That I've officially, okay. Yeah.
12 years. So 12 years, when we round it in teacher years, that's about 25, 30 years.
Feels like it, especially through the pandemic.
Yes. And so one of the things I want to discuss with you is, to start off, is what were your earliest inspirations? Like when I became a teacher, it was by accident. Both my parents were educators and I really had no choice. It was the only thing I really knew how to do.
Yeah.
But what made you decide? What were your earliest inspirations in terms of becoming an educator?
It's funny because I actually have a journal entry from when I was in high school where I wrote that I think it would be really fun to be a teacher, but I didn't want to be poor, so I wasn't going to become a teacher. And then went from that into college, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll be like a DJ. Like I was a morning show intern for a while at one of the radio stations. And while I was going to school full time, I worked at a grocery store called Wegmans, which you obviously are familiar with, and I loved. I was a front end manager there, and I had so many hours in my day were either at work or they were studying English at the university. I remember there was one summer in particular, I was taking, I think, 18 credits or something. And so I would be at school with these very, very long courses from like 8 a.m. until 3. And then I would work from 4 to midnight. And during that time, they put me in charge of training cashiers. And I had so much fun. I was like coming up with games to teach them produce codes. We were doing like scavenger hunts around the grocery store. And I was like, this is the most fun I've ever had. I was having the best time. And then
You were a teacher from the very beginning.
Immediately.
Oh my
I was
God.
like, I even wrote, like, I put together a whole folder guide of like how I put together a training manual, like a textbook basically for training cashiers, like curriculum guide. And so I loved it. And then I graduated with my bachelor's degree in English, and I became a technical writer for one of the government contractors out there. And I had to sit still and be quiet 40 hours a week.
That was tough for you, wasn't it?
So tough. I was so miserable. And so I remember sitting there and just staring at the computer in front of me. And like the end of the day came and I realized I had almost done nothing because I could not get myself to do what I was supposed to do because it was so boring. And I was like, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. And I thought about what I loved so much about the grocery store. I was working with teenagers. They were all like 16 to 18 years old that were like learning to run the register. I was like, well, I guess I maybe could go back and become a teacher, and like financially it was a lateral move from my tech writing job to teaching at that point. And so I was like, well, like maybe I'll go back. So then I went back and decided to do teaching. But I mean, I didn't get to do any student teaching because I was only 1 year into the program and I never subbed. And so my first day in charge of the classroom was my first day at the school that I taught with you. And I remember vividly right before the first day, I was like getting stuff out of the mailroom, and there was another teacher in there, and I was like visibly shaking. I was so nervous. And the teacher was like, "Are you nervous?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm terrified." She's like, "It's like that every year at first. It's fine." She's like, "You're gonna do great. Just fake it till you make it." And I'm like, "Great, yeah, great." And I got up in front of the class, and at the end of the day, I remember sitting down and just being like, "That was so fun." Like genuinely something that I just felt like, "Oh, of course I'm doing this. Of course I am," because it felt so good and so fun to be working with students.
So what made you then? Because like when we knew each other, you were in the classroom, you were teaching journalism, you were teaching English, you were having fun with the kids, they enjoyed you. There were some ups and downs, we know all about that.
Yep.
We won't get into that today.
Yeah, if people want to check that out, we did dive into that a little bit when you came on my podcast, so they can go visit that.
We talked about that, so we can get into that a little later. But
that's right.
But it was overall a great experience for them, and I think and for you. So that being the case, what then made you decide in mid-career, I'm working with young people, I'm in schools, I'm in classrooms on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to totally jump over the whole administrative piece. I don't want to be an assistant principal or dean of students. I want to go straight into teaching teachers how to be better teachers. What made you decide to do that?
Well, it was a little bit of frustration with some of the teachers that I was having join me in the classroom and the people from the university side that were coming to supervise them. Because, I taught at the school with you. I was there for 3 years, and then I went to California so my husband could go to grad school. And so I taught in 2 schools out there. One was a small private school, and the other one was a very large public school. And while I was there, I noticed that there was a huge disconnect between what the real classroom is actually like and what these teachers are being expected to do in their programs. I mean, these absurdly long reports and these different things. And part of the problem now that I'm doing this is that it's required by the state. It's not the university that wants them to do that. And so that has been one of my biggest frustrations. And so, they're doing these things that are very theoretical, but so little is done to actually help them with like the really logical, like, hey, a parent's really mad and they said they're going to come talk to you after school. What should you do? Like, there wasn't that conversation. And so there was that piece. And then there was also just thinking, okay, how could I make more money in this field and not work more hours? Because I saw how hard you worked, how hard all the administrators worked, and how much more often you guys got yelled at, because that I was not about that. I was like, I have so much respect for administrators because it is not a job I envy in the
Yeah.
least. Like, you end up catching heat for not only your mistakes, but any mistake of any teacher that's in the school. And that was not something, and you have to work a bunch over summer. And I'm like, I want summers. I want to make more money.
Right.
And I want to make education a better place for teachers and students. And so the great irony is I took a pay cut when I moved to the universities. I make less money now than I did when I was teaching high school.
Oh God, what?
Yeah. So, okay, partially, I should
Poor
caveat
baby.
that. I was in California where I was teaching
Right.
high school, public high school with a good union. And then now I'm in, very rural Indiana. But yeah, I took like a $12,000 a year pay cut. Which
Wait a
is
minute, time out. You took a $12,000 pay cut from what we were paying you?
No. God, no. From California. So I made double,
Oh, okay.
almost double what I
Okay.
made in Virginia when I was in California. But
Right.
again, housing out in California is insane, right? And
Yes,
childcare is insane and all of that. So where we could barely cover childcare on my high school teacher salary out in California, when I took this job and the pay cut, we were able to afford a house here. And so the cost of living here is just so much lower that it still made it pretty manageable. But yeah, that was the great irony, because I remember people telling me that when I was getting my doctorate, and people were like, you do know university professors don't make that much. And I'm like, that's other university professors though. Obviously I'm going to make so much money. And then I got my job offer and I was like, okay, so they were right. Got it. But I will say, being a university professor, after teaching high school, and I can't speak for other professors who have never done any kind of like education stuff in K-12. But the amount of like work-life balance as a college professor is so much better, and so much more manageable, and the flexibility and independence and and respect is all much different. So it still definitely was a net positive for me, but it was one of those where I was a little sticker shocked when I was like, oh, I'm not going to be making. And some huge universities, obviously you'll get paid a lot of money, but I have a great university that is a smaller community, and they really help students that are like first gen college students and all of that. And that demographic doesn't have a ton of money. So a lot of the money just goes into supporting the students, which is great too.
You know, I also want to commend you on the fact that when I watch you on social media, you see a lot of teachers who have made a cottage industry out of bashing administrators. And having been an administrator and having been a teacher, I get that, because as a teacher, there was a lot to bash. I understood that.
Yeah.
But I always respected your viewpoint the most, because you realized what a lot of people don't realize is that whatever guff you're taking, it hits the fan with us first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if teachers realized how much admins actually, well, some, I won't say all, but how much certain admins actually protect them from certain things as opposed to expose them to certain things. I think the dialogue, I think the discussion would be different, with regards to teachers and administrators. So I've always loved you for that. So you talked a little bit about, the positives of it, and the drawbacks. But in terms of when you compare a day in the life of a college professor, a day in the life of Dr. Forcum, to a day in the life of Mrs. Forcum, what are like one or two of the things just say, you know what, this is better, or this is worse?
I'm constantly balancing that, because I think the number one thing that I think is not better for me is that I really do miss the energy of high schoolers. it's the same energy that like burns you out by the end of the year, but when you
Right.
don't get any of it at all, it like
Right.
I miss that energy and that kind of level of relationship that you get with high school students, you know, the kids that come in early and stay hang out in your room at lunch and you have to be like get out, go away. Like I miss that because in college like you see them maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
Right.
They are
Right.
adults. They don't need you in that same kind of way. And so the relationship isn't there. And that was one of my favorite parts of teaching. And so, you know, I have one of the things in the comedy show that I'm doing right now, the two guys that I'm doing it with are still actively in K-12 teaching. And so they're always making fun of me and saying, like, well, you're not like really a real teacher. And like, I got to tell you, like, there is a level that I'm like, I kind of feel like in some ways that does ring a little bit true. Like, I am an educator and I'm educating college students, but the the part that made teaching like such an absolute joy to me a lot of times was winning over those really resistant students, getting those kids who were, you know, just completely disengaged and at risk and all of that and bringing them in. Those kids generally don't make it to my class
Right.
because I teach like I teach juniors and seniors in college. So where I got to be the person who like told them, you know, there's a better tomorrow and there's all of that. Like I never get to see them now,
Yes.
and I miss that so much. So like that I think is the thing that is the hardest for me to struggle with because I do miss that piece. And I'm still in touch with a lot of students that I taught at all the schools, and they'll reach out to me occasionally. And I have to focus on the fact that I'm equipping teachers that are going to be able to go out there and do that. And so hopefully, like the influence is going to be magnified and all of that. But that was one of my greatest joys in teaching, and so that's the thing I probably miss the most. Um, my day I my day-to-day life now though, I do feel like I'm able to give so much more to my kids because my kids are 4 and 6, and you know, they're at an age where I really want to be able to be very present with them and to be able to focus on stuff.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
when you're teaching actively, performing in front of your students 40 hours a week, you just are so tired by the time and decision fatigue by the time you get to your home and your life with your
It's
kids and
true.
everything.
True.
And teaching college, like I'm actively like with students teaching like 12 hours a week.
Okay.
So that's such a huge difference of energy and energy conservation and all of that kind of stuff. So I do feel like I'm able to be a better mom and be more present and be more creative with my instructional strategies because you know, when you're teaching 5 classes a day, 5 days a week, which was the case at a lot of the schools I was at, I tried to explain this to someone because, you know, pastors, they preach 1 hour a week, right? Like
Right.
they're up there and they have all
Right.
week. And everyone's like, yeah, of
Fair.
course they have all week to prepare. And I was like,
Right.
teachers have to do almost all of them are doing like 25, and if they are teaching different preps, especially like
Yeah.
when I went out on maternity leave, I remember I was teaching 5 different preps. And so, yeah, at the small school I was at, it was 5 separate preps, 3 different grade levels. So one of them was like 11th grade, where it was like 11 honors and AP, but
Okay.
like completely different lesson plans and all of that. And I had to create sub plans for my maternity leave for like 4
Crazy.
weeks.
Crazy.
Insane. And so,
And
like, that kind of stuff is just like, like the expectations on me were incredibly intense at times, especially like at that small school in particular where I really loved it. But it also, the demands in small schools are so much higher on the individual that it's really hard to not burn out. Um, and so to go from that to now where I'm at a university, there's a culture of respect with professors where the expectation is that you are an expert in your field. So when
right.
you talk about something, everyone is going to probably like take you pretty seriously. And there's like, I remember when I first showed up and I found out when my classes were, I was like, okay, so what time do I have to be here? And they're like, well, those are when your classes are. I was like, yeah, but like, it's a full-time job. So when do I have to be there? And they're like, you're not clocking in. Like, if you want to work from home, work from home. And that, like, I was like, wait, you trust me? And they're like, you have a doctorate. Why wouldn't we trust you? And I'm like, I
Right.
don't know. It
Yes.
just feels like maybe
Yes.
I feel like I'm breaking rules.
Yes. Because you were conditioned by what you were doing beforehand, and the wild part about that is you would think the more credentials you have and the more education you have, that people would trust you more. And I'm glad to see that does happen on the college level, because I can tell you, on the building level in high schools and elementary schools and middle schools, that does not always happen. So I get that. So
Yeah.
we're following your career. I see you all the time on Instagram, TikTok, the internet. I see you on Facebook. I see you in all these different places. And I love what you do, where you try to make education relatable. You tell humorous stories. Just things that have happened to you over the course of the day or the course of your years in teaching that are just hilarious, and the things that we can all relate to. I want you to share with me, if you can, because there's 1,000 stories that you have. What was the wildest thing, the craziest thing? And I'm sure it's probably a top 10. So pick out of that group, if you can. You can summarize it. What was the wildest thing that ever occurred or ever happened in a high school or a college classroom to you, for you, with you, around you?
So I think the main one was actually the first story I ever told, and it was at the school that I taught at with you, and it was these two students who I really liked, had a good relationship with both of them, and I knew they had been dating for a while, and then they had broken up. Like, she was like, yeah, we broke up, and they were like one of those couples that, like, if they were mad at each other, wouldn't talk to each other. But if they were like, like, they could get very loud sometimes. And I remember just being like, okay, they're not talking to each other right now. We're going to be doing some silent work time. I'm actually going to just sit them by each other, so that way they don't talk. Because if I sit them away from each other, they're going to talk smack about each other loud enough, and then it's going to be a fight. So I'll just sit them right next to each other. So
they were basically a domestic police phone call waiting to happen. The future.
Exactly. Right. So I was rolling the dice. I was like, they're probably not going to talk. The drama will be less if I sit them by each other. And you know how kids at that school in particular, I remember, would always have blankets with them.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And this girl was one of our blanket girls. And so she would always walk around with her blankets and all of that. And so she sits down, I sit them by each other, and I'm like, they're silent, right? So I feel like I'm nailing this, and it's totally fine. And I'm walking around the classroom. They're supposed to be working on some assignment on their computers, right? And I see his hands are on the computer. And I'm walking around, and you know how when you walk far enough away from the desks, you can see underneath the desks.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And I noticed that the blanket is not just over her lap.
Oh.
It's over.
I already know where you're going with this one.
It's over both of their laps, I fear. And so I'm walking around, and I think, that's strange, right? And then as I'm walking around, I see like some movement, and I realize that her hands are not on her computer. They are under the blanket on his lap.
Wow.
That right there, I just remember being like, no. Like you would with a dog. Like I was saying, like, immediately like rejected it. Was like, right. No. Right. And like it was one of those, like, they both kind of like jumped and like recoiled, and I was like, no more blankets. No more blankets. No more blankets. No more blankets.
I'm not even a principal anymore, and just hearing that story, my blood pressure was already rising. Because I could only imagine. Was I the one you came to? I don't remember any of this stuff. I blanked it out on purpose.
I think I blanked it out as well. I'm sure, because I think I remember you being like, no. It was so bad, and I was so mortified. And I just remember after class, like, making them stay back and be like, guys, seriously? They're like, what? I was like, Mr. Williams,
I'm sure I sent them home for a few days.
For sure. For sure. What I hadn't realized was that, like, they had broken up, but he had started dating somebody else. And so she was like jealous. And so that was like an attempt.
Yeah. Wow. That's I think I vaguely remember that.
It's so bad.
So let's get away from those painful memories for a second. I don't even know how to put you through that. But I get it. But How has your career, all parts of it, do you think, shaped who you are as a person, shaped who you are as a mom, as a wife, as a teacher, as a colleague, as a budding comedian, as a social media preeminent force? How has all that shaped it?
I was thinking about that and realized that all of those things are different, but it's all very, very similar in that there is nothing that prepares you more for comedy than standing in front of a bunch of students who are legally mandated to sit in front of you, and you're just performing your heart out and they're giving you nothing.
Right.
Right. Like
Right.
that, you can't have better preparation than that. And the isolating feeling sometimes of being in the classroom, I feel like just helps create this kind of, it's gallows humor in a lot of ways, where you're kind of like dealing with all of this chaos. And my goal is always that there's the truth behind the things that I'm putting out there in the content, the way that I'm presenting the information, so that people understand that like this is what teachers are going through.
Right.
Is always what is the heart behind all of it. Because I was talking to my parents about it recently, because I was telling my dad I'm not sure he wanted to come to the show, because I would be telling stories like about what I saw in my classroom with the blanket and stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if you're going to like that. And he's like, well, I don't think that's very appropriate. And I was like, here's the thing though, like if it offends you that teachers are dealing with this, it should, because that's the point.
Parents need to realize, and people outside of education need to realize the type of things that educators experience every day. I try to let them know it's not a bunch of teachers whining about their plot in life. These people risk sometimes relationships, sometimes family time, a whole bunch of stuff to teach your kid. And if you can't stand to deal with the everyday foolishness of some of the things that occur, why should you expect them to? Yes, right. I know they get paid, but we all get paid. And a lot of you aren't forced to deal with that.
Right. Exactly.
So it's something else. It really is.
Exactly.
So I want to wrap up by asking you two things. Number one, very quickly, future goals and what are we promoting? Because it's all about promotion. America is a giant money grab, as you know, and we're all about promotion.
We are indeed. Man, future goals. So I have a couple of things that I'm working on, and the biggest goal right now is to make sure that I am staying true to the real classroom experience. My goal is always to make sure that I am connected enough that that was my fear the second that I left the classroom, is I was like, I'm going to lose touch. And so I'm actually in the process right now of getting my sub cert so that I can go in and sub sometimes.
Okay.
So that I think is the overarching goal, is that I'm able to communicate the message and advocate for teachers and make teachers feel seen. That is always the overarching goal for me in my career. The other things that I have going on, I've got my book is coming out in spring of 2026. So I am very excited about that. It's a teacher survival guide called They Never Taught Us That. And this story that I told today, along with many, many other ways that I've screwed up, that's how I start every chapter, is basically explaining how I screwed up whatever I'm going to give advice on.
Okay.
And then there's going to be a lot of templates as well that people can download. So things like communication logs with parents and like different things like that could be used by any teacher. So I have that coming next year. And then the big upcoming things that are like a little bit sooner, I have my comedy show. There's the Teachers Lounge, which I'm doing with Gasper Randazzo and Philip Lindsay, who are two very, very funny teachers.
Funny dudes.
Very, very, very funny. And we're going to be hitting a bunch of dates. We've got some of our dates for fall, but we haven't announced yet. And then I'm doing a couple of solo shows before then. So in May, I'm going to be in Kansas City and Topeka, Kansas. And then I'm doing a solo show in San Diego on June 6th.
When you coming to the DMV?
I know, I need to. So I actually,
Virginia, to see you. What's going on?
I want to so bad. So that is definitely on the list, because I would love to play either like DC or Richmond or somewhere around there. But the biggest thing is trying to find the ins with the right comedy club. So if any of your listeners know a comedy club that wants to host me or the Teachers Lounge guys and me, that would be amazing. Because we're just now kind of filling out the year for 2025 and 2026.
Okay.
And then my podcast is actually, we're going through into our second season, and we're going into a new name because the previous name, which I still think is very tongue-in-cheek and funny, is Those Who Can't Do, but makes it really hard for search engine optimization. So no one could find it. So it's called How to Survive the Classroom. And we are going to be releasing new episodes in May. So in about a month from now.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, now, of course, Dr. Forcum and I will be speaking a little bit after the show is over because I still have some things I want to share with her. But this has been a marvelous time for me because when you're an educator and an administrator and you have the chance to say that you worked hand in hand with somebody who has achieved all the great things that Andrea Forcum has achieved, it makes you proud. So every time I see you do something different or move up or a comedy show or a great idea or a book, I take that as a personal win for myself. And so it's always a pleasure to know you, to be around you, to talk to you. And I hope that we'll be seeing each other again very, very, very soon.
Absolutely. And when we do release the book, I'm going to have to highlight the passages that are specifically talking about you, because the knowledge and wisdom that you gave me in those first few years teaching set me on the path to get me where I am. So when it comes out, you'll be getting the annotated version.
Okay, cool. All right. This has been Talk to Me with Eugene Williams Jr. I've been talking to Dr. Andrea Forcum. It's been a fantastic time. You all be blessed. Have a great one.